It's late, the kind of late that wraps your room in stillness. Before we begin, close your curtains, turn on a small fan, if you have one. Let a cool breeze run along your skin. This is not a story for bright rooms. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What time is it right now where you are? Because tonight you'll hear something no one ever wants to imagine. Not what it was like to see an execution, but what it was like to be the one holding the axe. Not as a monster, not as a villain, but as a man, born into a role no one would choose, a job that paid in coins, silence, and nightmares. You want to know why you'd regret being born an executioner in the Middle Ages? Let's begin. It wasn't my choice. No one ever asks the boy if he wants the hood. My father wore it before me. His father, too. Our name's been etched into the edge of the town record books. Not on the front pages where landowners are praised, in the margins, in smaller handwriting. We were the ones you only spoke about when you needed us. I was 12 when I first saw it up close. The block, the rope, the rust. My father took me to the edge of the square. He didn't speak. He never spoke much. The criminal was a man who'd stolen 2 chickens. The Baron had made an example of him. The crowd was drunk on the thrill of judgment. And my father raised the axe. It didn't go clean. I remember the sound before the blood. The sound of wood splitting, and the gasp. From the crowd. From me. My stomach turned. I was told later I fainted. That night I asked him, "Do you hate them?" He shook his head. Then I asked, "Do you hate yourself?" And he said nothing. They trained me with sacks of hay. You start small. Aim for the middle. Then pigs, then goats. Then when you're ready, the condemned. You think your hands won't shake. You think your body will be strong. But the first time a man begs you to spare him, you realize your soul was never part of the training. My first execution was a woman. They said she'd poisoned her husband. She was young. Her hands were tied in front of her, not behind, I remember that. She was crying, not loud, not screaming, just crying. The kind that comes from knowing the sun on your skin is about to be your last warmth. I asked the priest if she'd had confession. He nodded, eyes down. When I raised the blade, she looked at me, not with hate, not with fear, but with something worse, with forgiveness. The axe dropped. My arm hurt for 2 days. My sleep broke for months. But I kept going, because no one else would. Let me tell you what you don't see in paintings. You don't see what blood does to a man's clothes. It seeps into seams, into boots. The smell never really leaves. You don't see the stares in the market. They don't spit. They don't scream. They just look through you, like you're a bad smell that wears a face. You don't see the table at the tavern that always stays empty, because no one will sit beside the man who holds the rope. Children run from you. Women pray louder when you pass. And the men? They nod, but never invite you in. You eat alone. You live alone. you die alone. Even the grave digger says little when it's your turn. And the nightmares, you see them in dreams, not the condemned, but the moments before. A boy's lip trembling, a father's whisper. A girl who looks too much like someone you once knew. They play over and over. Your mind edits them. Sometimes they beg louder. Sometimes they scream your name. Sometimes they say nothing at all and just watch. That's the worst. When they just watch. And yet, they need you. The king needs you when the rebels rise. The judge needs you when the sentence falls. The church needs you when the witches are burned. They all need you, but never say it. They pay in coin, in food, sometimes in silence. But no one thanks you. No one says, "Well done," because you remind them of what they are capable of what justice costs. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because when you say, "I wish I lived in the Middle Ages," you forget that someone had to swing the sword, that someone had to live with what it meant. So, if you ask why you'd regret being born an executioner in the Middle Ages, know this. It's not just the blood. It's not just the screams. It's not just the loneliness. It's knowing that your life will never be yours, not even your death. Because when the people are done with you, they won't bury you in consecrated ground. You'll rest under a stone with no name, and even the dirt will forget who you were. You might think that the worst part of the job was the act itself, the swing, the drop, the final moment. But you'd be wrong. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting in the cold behind the wooden gate, holding a blade that had been sharpened, not out of love for precision, but because dullness meant cruelty. Waiting as the priest spoke too slowly. Waiting as the condemned cried or prayed or fought their bonds with a desperation that made your hands tremble, not from fear, but from something deeper. It's the stillness before the storm that breaks you. The moment where you know a life is ending, and you're the one appointed to end it. Not by choice, by duty. There were days when no one would meet my eye. I was given food by placing coins on a wooden counter and waiting for the baker to set the bread down and walk away. I never touched hands. People whispered around me. Superstition said we were cursed, that touching a plika's skin would bring death to your child, that a handshake could rot your fingers. They never asked how I felt. Not once, because no one wants to know how the hangman sleeps. But I'll tell you, he sleeps badly. He wakes to the creak of phantom ropes. He hears names in the dark, and he wonders when his own end comes, who will be left to watch. I had a house outside the town walls. It was built for men like me, on the edge of things. The chimney didn't smoke well, and the roof leaked when it rained. But it was quiet. I had a garden and a dog. The dog was the only one who didn't flinch when I raised my voice. He slept at the foot of the bed. He never judged. I buried him myself. In that soil behind the cottage, There are memories, more than I care to count. Once, a child knocked at my door. A boy, maybe 10. He asked, "Are you the Axeman?" I didn't answer. He said, "My brother says you kill people." Still, I said nothing. Then he looked up at me, not with fear, but with fascination, and asked, "Do they scream when you do it?" I closed the door, not because I was angry, but because I knew the answer, and I couldn't bear to hear it said out loud. There are tricks to surviving this life. Some men drank before the job. Some never spoke. Some learned to hum while they worked. I memorized psalms, not because I believed they'd save me, but because saying them made me feel less empty. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I knew that valley. I worked there. The worst execution I ever did wasn't the messiest. It wasn't the one where the crowd turned violent. It wasn't even the one where the man screamed my name like I had wronged him personally. Number. It was a woman who thanked me. She said, "Thank you for not letting them burn me." And then she kissed my hand, like I was a savior, like I was doing her a kindness. I couldn't eat for 3 days. I buried the clothes I wore that day, and in the nights that followed, I woke, gasping, feeling her lips still pressed against my skin. They used to say that Plica hands were cold, but mine were warm, calloused but warm. I used oils to keep the skin from cracking, because cracked skin could slip on a handle, and a slip meant cruelty. They said our eyes were dead, but I saw everything. I remember every face, every last breath, every final word. You think that fades. It doesn't. It sharpens with time. I remember the girl who asked to see the sunrise one last time, and the soldier who gripped my arm and said, "Tell my wife I never cried." And I nodded, and I lied, because he did. Once I asked the priest, "Do they go to heaven?" He paused, too long, then said, "If they ask forgiveness." I didn't ask what happens to the man who gives them death. I already knew. We're not in the prayers. We're not in the scriptures. We're not in the paintings of redemption. We are the blade, not the hand that blesses, not the heart that mourns, just the blade. And so you learn to live in pieces. The man who walks through the market is not the same man who kneels beside the block. The one who tends the fire at night is not the one who hoists the rope in the morning. You break yourself apart to keep going, because if you stay whole, you go mad. The mind is not meant to carry so much death. Not for so long. Not alone. Still want to be born an executioner? Still think the coin is worth it? Still believe the mask is just for show? Let me remind you, the mask doesn't hide the face. It hides the humanity, because the crowd doesn't want to see a man. They want to see justice, even if it's delivered by someone who's dying a little every time he swings the blade. They say you get used to it, to the weight of the axe, to the blood, to the silence after the screaming stops. They lie. You don't get used to it. You adapt. The way a wound hardens into scar tissue. The way a blind man learns where the steps creak. But deep down, you never forget what it cost you. The town square always smelled like old wood and spilled ale. It wasn't meant for executions, not originally. It was a place for bread sellers and coin tossers, for games and gossip. But the gallows changed it. The blood changed it. Now the pigeons avoided the center. Children were told not to play there. Old women crossed themselves when passing. And I arrived before dawn. I never looked at the crowd. Not once. They came for the show. I came for the work. Let me tell you what the work actually was. Most think I only lifted the blade. They don't know the rest. I sharpened the edge myself. Always. A dull axe makes a man suffer. I cleaned the rope. Grease on the pulleys meant less screaming. I inspected the wood of the scaffold, checking for splinters, soft spots, loose planks. You don't want the condemned slipping, twisting, dragging others down. You don't want mistakes, not because of mercy, but because a mistake makes you the spectacle. And once you're the spectacle, you're not a tool of justice anymore. You're entertainment. And entertainment is cheap, replaceable. One winter I was sent north to assist in a trial. The accused was a noble. Those are the worst. Because the screams are quieter, the eyes sharper, the stakes political. When you kill a thief, the crowd jeers. When you kill a noble, the air holds its breath. And when his family is watching, you feel the knife twist in you long before you lift your own. He didn't beg. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, not as a monster, not as a servant, as a mirror, and I saw what he saw, that we were both being used. He for a message, me for the delivery. When it was over, I returned to my quarters, and I vomited into the basin. I hadn't done that in years. People assume we were uneducated, brutes. But we knew the law better than most priests. We had to. You can't kill a man unless the seal is correct. You can't hang a woman on certain days. You must allow for last words even if they curse the king, and you must record everything. Yes, even that. Each name, each crime, each date, each death. I had ledgers not for pride, not for memory, but because one day someone might ask, did he really deserve it? And you need to be able to answer, even if your voice shakes. I kept one page blank, just one. It sat near the back. No names, no ink, just space. I used to stare at it and wonder if that's where my name would go. And who would write it? There's a sound the body makes when it drops. Not the rope creak, not the bones, not the crowd. It's the moment between air and nothing, like a breath caught mid-prayer. Some say they don't hear it. I do, every time. It's like a drum beat, and it follows me, even here, even now. in the quiet. Let me tell you about my hands. They don't shake anymore. Not when I hold a blade. Not when I tie a knot, but when I hold a spoon. When I try to eat soup, they tremble. Not from weakness, from memory, because that motion, that delicate control, it's something I never needed in the square. Only here, in the quiet, in the moments where I pretend to be a man again. Not a function, not a punishment, just a man. But the body remembers, and the hands, they betray you. I've been called many things. Butcher, sinner, ghost. Once a priest whispered that I was the hand of God. I told him, God doesn't need hands like mine. He never spoke to me again. One day, it will end. The orders will stop coming. The hood will hang unused. The blade will rust. And I'll be left with whatever part of myself is still human, if any. If there's anything to bury, they'll do it outside the church wall, same as always. But maybe, just maybe, someone will find the blank page and understand that I didn't choose this, that I tried to do it clean, that I tried to do it right, that I lived with every name I wrote and died with every one I couldn't forget. There was a saying once, whispered by those who lived in the lower districts, the ones with soot on their sleeves and dirt beneath their nails. Better a rat catcher than a rope man. They meant me. Because rats don't cry when you kill them, and they don't call you murderer with their eyes. Let me tell you about the table in my home. It had 4 legs, uneven. I had to wedge a stone under one to keep it from wobbling. There were 2 chairs. I used only one. The other was always empty. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because I still remembered what it felt like to speak with someone. Not about death, not about duty, just words. The last person who sat in that chair was a woman named Annalisa. She didn't know who I was at first. She sold herbs in the square. Her hands always smelled of thyme and wet soil. She didn't flinch when I bought from her, didn't glance down, didn't back away. That alone was a miracle. One evening I saw her struggling with a basket too large for her arms. I carried it for her. She offered me tea, and I said yes. It was the first time I'd sat with someone in months, maybe years. We spoke of weather, of herbs, of a cat that lived behind her stall. I didn't mention my work, and she didn't ask. That silence, it was mercy. But silence doesn't last. One day, someone told her. I saw it in her eyes before she said a word. Not hatred, not fear. Worse, pity. And then she said quietly, "Why do you do it?" I had no answer, not one I could say out loud. So I said nothing. She never invited me again. And I never bought herbs again. But the scent of thyme still follows me, like regret. I used to watch people pray, not in the chapel. I was not allowed there, but from outside, in the rain, through glass. I watched their lips move, watched the way their shoulders folded inward like wings tucking into themselves, watched how they held their hands tightly, desperately, like rope. I wondered if God heard them, if he turned his face when he saw mine. I wouldn't blame him. They say we are necessary, that without someone to swing the axe, justice has no teeth. But justice, I've learned, is blind in more ways than one. It doesn't see the truth. It doesn't see the lies. It only sees the signature at the bottom of the page. And when that signature comes down, it's me they summon. No one questions the words once they're sealed. They only look to me to carry them out, even if the accused is a boy, even if the crime is silence, even if the law is wrong, because the rope does not know mercy, and neither, they say, should I, but I do. I remember every time I hesitated, not long, a second, half a breath, but it was there, a flicker of doubt, a moment where my hand betrayed my heart. And that moment stays with me far longer than the swing. Once, during a summer festival, a man recognized me. He was drunk, loud, surrounded by friends. He shouted, "Hey, Axeman, how many today?" People laughed, not all, but enough. I said nothing. I walked on. The laughter followed. Later that night, I passed the alley behind the tavern. That same man was there, alone, bent over, vomiting. He saw me, went quiet, then said, through spit and shame, "Sorry." I nodded and walked away, because what else could I do? He was just the echo. I was the sound. You ask why you'd regret being born into this? Because every kindness you receive feels like a lie. Because every smile feels like a trick. Because you learn to doubt joy, even your own, especially your own. Because somewhere, deep inside, you start to believe you don't deserve it. I once had a dream. I was standing at the edge of the sea. The sky was gray, the water still, and all the people I had executed were standing behind me, silent, motionless, waiting, not angry, not vengeful, just present. And I knew they would follow me into the water, wherever I went, because that's what it means to be an executioner. You never walk alone. Not truly. Not ever. The worst part isn't the blood. It's not the stains that never wash out. Not the muscle pain in your shoulder after the swing. Not the quiet afterward. The worst part is what comes hours later. When your work is done. When the scaffold is empty. When the sun has set. And you're left alone. With the sound of your own breath. With the memory of someone else's last. They say a man can get used to anything, but that's not true. You don't get used to watching a body fall limp. You just learn how to blink slower. I've buried 3 pairs of boots since I began, not because they wore out, but because they soaked through. And you can't wear that memory on your feet forever. Let me speak plainly for a moment. No poetry, no mystery, just truth. I am not a hero. I am not a monster. I am a function, and every time I do my job well, someone disappears, and the world claps. But not for me. Never for me. They clap for the idea of justice, for order, for fear. They clap because it's not them on the block, because it was someone else's name on the paper. And me, I go home and listen to the silence grow louder. There was a day I almost walked away. The prisoner was a boy, 15, maybe. Hands like mine when I first held a blade. Too soft, too small. He'd stolen bread. Not even for himself. For his sister. The magistrate wanted to send a message. Let no theft go unpunished. Even kindness, especially kindness. He didn't fight, didn't cry, just stood still. When I tied the cloth over his eyes, he said, "Thank you for not letting them see me." I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. Because if I spoke, my voice would break, and I couldn't afford that. Not in front of the crowd, not in front of him. I thought of running that night, packing a satchel, leaving before dawn, finding a farm in the South, living under another name. But I knew I wouldn't, because who else would they call? Who else would do it clean? Who else would do it without laughing, without cruelty, without turning it into theater? Someone worse. Someone who didn't blink. And so I stayed. Not because I wanted to, but because I feared what might come after me. There was an old woman once, accused of witchcraft. Everyone in the village said she cursed the cattle, that she whispered to bones, that her breath killed flowers. They dragged her to the stake, begging, half-dressed, wild-eyed. I stood beside the torch. The priest gave the order. I lit the bundle, turned my face. But not fast enough. I heard her scream, heard her curse, but not the town. Me. You could have made it quick, and she was right. But they didn't want quick. They wanted fire. They wanted smoke. They wanted to watch her burn. And I gave them what they wanted. Because it was my job. Because it was the law. Because it was Tuesday. There are people who say we were evil. There are others who say we were necessary. Neither of them ever looked into our eyes. Not when it mattered. Not in the moment between life and death. Not when you hold someone's final heartbeat in the palm of your hand. There is no glory in this work, no legacy, no monument, only memory. And memory is heavier than any axe. 1 year, the king died. A new one rose. He wanted change. Fewer hangings, he said. More mercy. I welcomed it. I thought, maybe I'd be forgotten. Maybe I'd just become a man again. Grow old quietly. Die with my hands clean. But mercy, I learned, is not for everyone. Not when rebellions rise. Not when messages must be sent. Not when a crowd needs fear more than bread. And so they called me again. A different court, a different name, same swing, same silence. You're still asking, aren't you? Why would I regret it? Because regret isn't about doing wrong. Sometimes it's about doing right. Too many times. Because even when you follow every order, even when you sharpen every blade, even when you say every prayer, you still end up alone. With your name wiped from the church roll, with your grave dug in cursed ground, with the wind carrying only the echoes of your work, and not a single soul to say, he tried. They never taught us how to stop, how to unlearn the weight, how to unsee the faces, how to put down the blade and become something else. No one trains you for the after, because no one cares what happens to the axe when it's not needed, only that it's sharp when the time comes. There's something I haven't said yet about the masks. You've seen them in paintings, no doubt. Those black hoods with slits for eyes. A symbol, they say, of anonymity, of terror. But that's not what they were for. They weren't for the crowd. They were for us, to hide from the condemned, to disappear behind the fabric, to create a little space between man and tool. Because it's easier to kill when they can't see your eyes, and easier still when you can't see theirs. There were days I didn't wear it, not out of pride, but because I wanted them to know that a real man stood before them, not a monster, not a myth, just someone doing what no one else would, and maybe, for a moment, they'd see me not as the end, but as a reflection, a reminder of how close they'd come, or how easily they could be next. Once, during a feast day, I was summoned to the castle, and not for a sentence, but for dinner. An empty gesture by the new duke, young, brash, eager to seem merciful, by breaking bread with the hangman. They gave me a clean tunic, sat me 3 chairs down from a bishop. No one spoke to me. They passed bread like I wasn't there, laughed at jokes I wasn't meant to hear, but I watched. Their hands trembled as they reached for the wine. Their eyes avoided mine like mirrors turned backward. They feared me, not because I was evil, but because I was the consequence they wrote into law. I was what happened when their words became flesh. And flesh met steel. I drank little, ate less. When the music started, I stood to leave. A guard followed me to the gate. Didn't speak, didn't nod. Just watched me vanish into the dark. Back to my home. Back to silence. Back to the place where mercy lives in pieces. Buried under names I can't forget. They asked once if I had a family. I said no, but that's not true. I had a brother. He was younger, faster, kinder. He worked with horses, smelled like hay and saddle oil. He used to laugh when I came home from training, said I smelled like iron and regret. We hadn't spoken in years when I got the summons. His name was on it, accused of aiding a fugitive, sheltering a rebel, punishable by death. I petitioned the court, begged them to send another executioner. They refused. said, "The law is blind, and so must you be." The day came. The crowd gathered. He didn't look surprised to see me, didn't flinch, didn't plead, just said, "You always did what had to be done." And then softer, "I don't blame you, but I did, and still do. Since then, I've never used the same axe, never crossed the same square. That day broke something in me, not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, a fraying of the edges, a hollowing of the core, and no amount of coin can patch what death tears loose. They still sent orders, still paid me, but part of me stopped arriving. My hands moved, my body walked, but something else remained behind. Maybe it's still there, in that square, in that moment, staring back at me, silent, still, unmoving. Some nights, when the wind is low and the fire burns quiet, I think about those I spared. Yes, there were some, not many, but some. I faked ropes, miscounted drops, helped them vanish into the dark, risked the gallows myself. Why? Because even a butcher needs to know he's not a machine. That somewhere in all this metal and blood, there is still a man, still a heart, still hope. But don't mistake this for redemption. There is no forgiveness written for my name, no prayers offered for the man who sharpened the law until it bled. Only dust, only memory, only regret. So if you say you envy the past, if you wish you'd lived in the age of kings and swords and honor, ask yourself, would you swing the axe? Would you hold the rope? Would you live in silence so others could cheer? Would you kill with your hands so the world could pretend its justice was clean? Would you still want this life? Then take it. But know this, it will never let you go. You'd think people forget that once the square is empty and the scaffold taken down, the memory fades. That when your hands are no longer red, the town forgives. They don't. They remember. In silence, in distance, in the way they cross themselves when you pass by. Years after my last sentence, children still avoided me on the road. Old men still refused to meet my eyes. Even when the ropes were burned and the blade was hung up for good, I was still him. Still the one who made fathers disappear. Still the one whose knock meant grief. Still the shape behind the hood. But I kept living, if that's what you want to call it. I mended fences, tilled small land, chopped wood with the same arms that once raised judgment. Some nights I forgot. Others, I didn't sleep at all. I'd lie in bed with my hands crossed on my chest, like the dead. Eyes open, counting the names. 1, 2, 5, 20. Each face a stone in the wall I built inside myself. Once in late autumn, a knock came at the door. It had been years. No one came to visit. No one dared. I opened it, expecting trouble. but it was a young man, thin, nervous, dirt on his boots. He asked, "Were you the executioner?" I paused, then said, "I was." He looked at me for a long time, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. Worn, faded. "This is from my father," he said. "He told me to bring it to you after he died." I took it. Inside was just a line. "I forgive you." No name, no signature. But I remembered the face. A merchant, executed for treason. He'd wept in the end, not for himself, but for his wife. Said her name over and over like a prayer. And now, this. Forgiveness. Too late to save anything, but just in time to break something open in me. I nodded to the boy, said nothing. He left. I kept the note. It's still here, in the drawer beside my bed, creased, quiet, a whisper in the dark. They used to say Plika never cried, but they were wrong. You cry. Not in front of others, not while working, but later, in shadows, when no one's left to see. Tears don't fall for the dead. They fall for what you lose while sending them away. You lose your place in the world. You lose the right to grieve. You lose the sound of your own laughter, bit by bit, swing by swing, until you're not sure there's anything left of you but the hands. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd refused back at the beginning. If I'd told my father I wouldn't take the hood, would they have punished us? Would they have exiled him? Hung him in my place? Maybe. But that's the trick of the trap. It doesn't start with blood. It starts with duty, with a promise, with a silent nod passed down from father to son. And once you accept it, you belong to it, not the other way around. I've known men who were proud of it, executioners who strutted through town with their shoulders back, daring anyone to speak. Some even carved notches into their walls, one for each life taken. I never did. The wall is inside me, and the notches aren't wood. They're voices, some angry, some quiet, some who said thank you, yes, thank you, more than once, not because they wanted to die, but because they were tired, or broken, or simply ready. And I was the one who could give them an end, a clean one. That's something most people never understand. Sometimes the cleanest gift is the hardest to give. I've had people ask, "Did you enjoy it?" And I always pause, because the truth is cruel. I didn't enjoy it, but I was good at it, efficient, calm, precise. That made me valuable. And value, in the eyes of those above, is all that matters. They don't care how you sleep. They don't care what you see when you close your eyes. They care that the job gets done without mess, without spectacle. They care that order holds, even if it costs you your soul. Sometimes I walk through the fields, let the wind pass through me, pretend I'm someone else, a farmer a mason, a man with calluses from honest stone, not sharpened steel. But always the weight follows. Even now, after all this time. Even now, when no one remembers my name. Because I remember. And that is enough. That is the real sentence. And I carry it every day, every breath, until the rope comes for me. Let me tell you about the tools, not just the axe. Everyone always asks about the axe, but there were others, and each had a sound, a smell, a memory. There was the garrote, a simple thing, iron and wood. Turn the handle slowly, press the collar into the throat. No blood, no spectacle, just silence. Except for the sound, the quiet crunch of cartilage, the sudden gasp that never finishes. It was used for traitors sometimes, or women of nobility, because blood, for them, was unseemly, as if strangling a person was cleaner. Kinder, it wasn't. Then there was the wheel, the worst of them, a punishment, not a death, not at first. You tie the limbs, one by one, stretch them across wood, then you break them with a hammer, not once, not fast, but carefully, deliberately, kneecap, shin, elbow, arm, and the crowd, they cheer, they gasp, they laugh, because pain, when it isn't theirs, is entertainment. That's when I stopped looking at faces, not just the condemned, but the audience, because it wasn't the executions that changed me. It was the people who enjoyed them. One winter, they brought me a man who'd stolen bread during a famine. He had 3 children. I asked the magistrate, could we not use the stocks instead? He waved me off. The law is the law. I asked again. He threatened my post, so I complied. But I made it fast. I made it clean. And afterward, I went to the children's home, left coin under the door. It wasn't enough. But it was something, even if they never knew it came from me. Especially if they never knew. There's a detail most never consider. The condemned rarely die alone. Their mothers are there, their sons, their wives, and their eyes. They never look away. Not from the rope, not from the axe, not from me. I've seen 100 kinds of grief, the silent scream, the collapse, the curse, the prayer. Each one slices deeper than any blade I've held. And yet I keep standing because someone must. Because the law doesn't swing itself. Because mercy has a cost. And I've already paid too much. One day, a noble asked to see my tools. He was young, spoiled, curious in the wrong way. I showed him the block, the brands, the rope. He laughed, said, I expected something grander. As if killing needed polish, as if death should shine. I handed him the axe, told him to hold it. He did, but not for long. It's heavier than it looks, like all things in this line of work. He gave it back, didn't laugh again. You still want to know what makes this life unbearable? It's not the dying. It's the pretending. Pretending it doesn't affect you. Pretending you don't remember. Pretending you're not just another man, born into a role no one else wanted. It's being useful, but never human. Needed, but never welcomed. Trusted, but never touched. That's the curse. The sentence I serve every day, not because I broke the law, but because I carried it out. Because I was loyal, because I didn't run. And now, I can't. I used to have dreams of being a carpenter, to build instead of destroy, to measure, to smooth, to join wood to wood with purpose. Instead, I built gallows, measured rope, smoothed the edge of blades, joined man to death. And that is the regret. That I didn't get to choose the kind of work my hands would do. That I was born to serve a need no one dares name in daylight. That I could not become more than the sum of what I've taken, only the shadow of it. And even that flickers. So when you hear stories of glory and chivalry, of knights and kings and courts of honor, remember this: they had me too. In every castle, in every kingdom, behind every banner and blessing, was someone like me, waiting in the corner, hood low, blade sharp, ready, just in case words failed, just in case peace broke, just in case someone needed to be reminded what power really looked like. You don't put that in songs. You don't carve it into stone. But it was always there. I was always there. Waiting. They never asked how I sharpened the axe. They only asked, will it be quick? As if the edge alone decided that. As if speed could forgive the sentence. But there's an art to it. Not like a painter's brush. More like a butcher's blade. Precise, rehearsed, cold. You sit by the stone wheel. Press the steel at just the right angle. Turn slow, steady. Let the sparks dance. You don't think about what it'll do. You can't. Not if you want your hand to stay steady. And when it's done, you test it on leather. If it slides without sound, it's ready. If it sings, you sharpen too much. You're showing off. And showing off gets people hurt. I've heard men scream before the blade even touched them. The mind breaks before the bone. One man cried for his mother. Another begged to speak to a priest. Then changed his mind. Said he didn't want forgiveness from a God who let this happen. Some went silent. Others told jokes. One man even spat in my face. I didn't wipe it, didn't blink, because I understood. When a man is about to die, he'll reach for anything. Rage, laughter, spit, and I was the only thing within reach. You think the axe is heavy? It is. But not in the arms, in the silence afterward, when the crowd starts to disperse, when the air goes still, when there's nothing left to do but clean the blood, wrap the body, go home, That's when the weight settles, not on the shoulders, in the chest, like a hand pressing down, reminding you what you've done, who you've become, and who you'll never be again. They called us cursed, said we were marked by the devil, but the devil doesn't work like this. He doesn't swing blades. He writes laws. He wears robes. He drinks wine beside kings. We were just the hands. Nothing more, nothing less. Hands that were told what to do and did it. Every time, without asking, without faltering, without hope. Hope, you see, is dangerous. It creeps in when you let yourself feel. It shows you pictures of a different life. A farm, a child, a woman brushing flour from her hands. And then it fades as quickly as it came. And you're left staring at a block of wood stained with years, at the shallow groove where heads used to rest, at the grooves your boots wore into the steps from climbing them over and over again. Hope doesn't survive there. Not for long. I once buried a man with my own hands, not because it was my duty, but because no one else would. He was poor, alone, a thief. Executed at dawn, no family came, no priest spoke. So I waited until nightfall, wrapped him in cloth, carried him myself to the edge of the woods, dug until my fingers bled, marked the earth with a stone. No name. But I remember. I always remember. Because if no one else mourns them, I must, not aloud, not with tears, but with memory. And memory is the closest thing I have to grace. There were times when the crowd turned angry, when the condemned was loved, or feared, or wrongly accused. I'd hear murmurs, feel their breath tighten. Some shouted, some cursed me, called me butcher, traitor, soulless. But I never replied, because I wasn't there for them. I wasn't their villain. I wasn't their hero. I was something worse, a mirror, and no one likes what they see in one of those. I knew one man who tried to run, not from the sentence, from the job. He threw his hood in the fire, vanished from the province. I heard they found him years later, drunk, mumbling in the marketplace about voices in the wind. The townsfolk didn't recognize him, but I did. They said he died mumbling names. I believe it, because I do the same, even if no one hears, even if it's just a whisper between me and the dark. You still think this was a choice? A path someone picked freely? Number, it was given like a wound, inherited like a curse, passed down like a scar. And when people say, someone had to do it, I say, yes, but why did it have to be me? Do you know what a man smells like when he dies afraid? It's not sweat, not piss, not blood. It's something else. A sharpness in the air, like iron and rot. Like wet earth dug up too soon. You can smell it even before the axe rises. I smelled it more times than I can count. And each time it clung to me, in my hair, my clothes, my skin. No matter how I scrubbed, it stayed. Fear has memory, and it doesn't wash off. I used to think the job would make me stronger, that the weight would forge me into something unbreakable. That routine would be my shield. I was wrong. It made me quieter, slower, hollow in places I didn't know could go empty. Not broken, just worn, like a door hinge that doesn't squeak anymore. Not because it's well oiled, but because it's rusted stiff. They never told us what to say. Not before, not after. You were expected to stand, to act, to leave. Words made it harder. Words gave it shape. And once something has shape, it can haunt you. So I kept silent. Except once. A young man, maybe 17, accused of striking a guard. He didn't resist, didn't weep, just stared at the clouds above, as if trying to memorize them. Before I lowered the hood, he whispered, "Do you think they'll remember me?" I paused, then said, "I will." It was the only truth I had, and the only comfort I could give. That night, I wrote his name on the back of a ledger. Not the official one. Mine. I didn't use ink. I scratched it with the point of a knife. Because some names aren't for record, they're for keeping. And some debts aren't paid in coin. I once asked an old priest, "How do you carry your sins?" He looked at me and said, "You ask God to take them." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure God wanted mine, and I wasn't sure I had the right to ask. So I carried them myself, on my back, in my dreams, in my bones. A weight I didn't deserve, but one I accepted, because that's what this life is. A quiet acceptance of unbearable things. And if you think that ends when the killing stops, you're wrong. Retirement didn't save me. It just gave the ghosts more room to walk around. The house got quieter, the air heavier, the nights longer. With no orders to follow, no gallows to prepare, I became what I feared most. Just a man. No purpose. No mask. No distance between what I've done and who I am. Sometimes I visit the square. It's different now. Children run through it. Merchants sell figs and honey. A juggler throws knives for applause. No one remembers. Not the block. Not the rope. Not the man who used them. And maybe that's mercy. Maybe forgetting is the last kindness the world offers. But I don't forget. I can't. Because forgetting would mean it didn't matter. And it did. Every name, every swing, every breath taken before the last. They mattered. Even if only to me. I keep a box under my bed. Inside, a folded piece of leather, a small wooden cross, the coin I was paid for my first job, and a lock of hair. Don't ask whose. I won't say. Some things don't belong to the world. They belong to the wound. And the wound never lets go. They say justice is blind, but I've seen her eyes. They're tired. They're full of compromise. and they look away more often than they look forward. Justice isn't blind. She's exhausted, and I was her crutch, her dirty tool, the one she dropped when she wanted to feel clean again. So, if you still think being born an executioner wouldn't be so bad, think again. Because it's not the death that breaks you, it's the memory of it, and the silence that follows. That never ends. Sometimes I wonder if the rope remembers, if it holds the shape of every throat it touched, if it whispers in the dark when no one's watching. I used to hang it carefully after each execution, coiled, tied, sealed away in a wooden chest. But I swear, some nights I heard it shift. Not from wind, not from mice, like it exhaled, like it missed the weight. And maybe, so did I. Not the killing, but the certainty, the structure, the awful rhythm of a life where at least I knew my place. After the king died and the courts changed, the executions slowed. They still happened, of course, but the crowds were smaller. The spectacle faded. Justice was being rewritten in ink, not in blood. And men like me, we weren't needed as often. Which is another kind of death, a slower one. They sent me a boy once, not for execution, for training. Said he'd shown no fear around corpses, said he was strong, said he was disposable. That's the word they used, disposable. I refused. I told them I would not turn another child into what I became. They threatened me, told me I'd be replaced. Said I was growing old. I told them, then find someone younger. But not him, not that boy. He still had soft hands. He still looked up at the stars. I wouldn't be the one to break that. Sometimes I think the world didn't need less death. It needed fewer men willing to make it routine. I was one of those men, and I regret it. Not just for what I did, but for what I didn't stop. For every time I told myself it was duty, that it was better me than someone crueler, that I could control the pain. You tell yourself those lies long enough, and they become your prayers. Silent, hollow, comforting, until you forget what truth even sounded like. The birds know who I am. Strange, I know, but they do. They don't fly near my roof. They don't perch on the trees outside my window. The sky around me is quiet. It's as if even the creatures of God avoid what's been touched by so much ending. Even animals sense death. And I wore it like a second skin. Still do. Even now. You ask why I didn't run, why I didn't say no, but that's not how it works. You don't choose the rope. It's handed to you, coiled like a gift, laid at your feet like inheritance. And when everyone else steps back, you're the one still standing. And that's all it takes. Not courage, not cruelty, just a moment where you don't move fast enough, and suddenly it's yours. Forever. They held a festival once, years after my last execution. A celebration of peace. There was a parade, musicians, children with paper crowns, and in the center of the square where I once worked, a stage, actors reenacting the fall of tyrants. One man wore a hood, a fake axe. He played the role of the old executioner. The crowd laughed. He bowed. I watched from a distance. He moved with swagger, grinned beneath the mask, twirled the axe like a dancer, and for the first time in years, I felt rage. Not because he mocked me, not because he made the audience cheer, but because he didn't understand. He thought it was theater, a costume, a story. He didn't know what it was like to hear a mother scream your name. He didn't know what it was to bury guilt under your fingernails. He didn't know what it meant to kill clean and cry ugly. After, I left before the curtain fell, walked home alone. The street smelled of roasted meat and wine, but I could only smell iron and wood and the sweat of fear, because some things stay with you forever. I wrote once a letter to no one, to everyone. I burned it after, because even paper doesn't deserve that weight. But I remember the first line. If you ever ask yourself what it means to be the hand of justice, first ask what it means to lose your own humanity. Now the rope sits in the attic, dry, coiled, silent. I keep it not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that mercy is a choice, and silence is not the same as peace, and that sometimes the ones who did the worst things are the only ones who know how much they mattered. I wonder sometimes if they remember me in the records, the court scribes, the judges, the priests, if my name is scribbled in some dusty archive. Just another line, another tool listed beside the verdict. Execution carried out by blank initials, or just authorized official. No face, no past, no soul. That's what we become, a function without form, a shadow made of duty. But I remember them, every one, not always their names, those fade, but their voices, their final words, the way they stood, the way they didn't, those stay, like scars you can't see, but still itch when it rains. One man knelt instead of standing, said he'd rather fall forward into death than face it eye to eye. Another asked to hold his son's hand before the rope. The boy wasn't allowed past the guards. The man died with his palm open, empty. Another looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "I forgive you." And that broke something I hadn't known was still whole. You'd be surprised how many of them were quiet. Not all screamed, not all cursed. Some just accepted it, as if they were already gone before the blade dropped, as if death was lighter than the life they'd been given. That's what stays with you. The silence, the kind that speaks louder than the crowd. There was a noble once, guilty by all accounts, cruel, selfish, untouchable until the crown shifted. When his time came, he looked at the axe and smiled, not out of bravery, out of pride, as if his death meant something, as if being executed by me was still a stage, still about him. I almost hated him, but even then, I gave him the clean stroke. Because I would not let his ego poison my work. Even he deserved an end free of suffering, not for his sake, for mine. There are things you don't realize you miss until they're gone. The way people used to call your name without fear, the sound of shared laughter, the weight of a hand on your shoulder. Simple things, human things, things that die long before your body does. I miss being seen as a man, not a symbol, not a warning, not a whisper parents use to scare children into obedience, just a man who breathes, who hopes, who hurts. Once, a child dropped her doll in the street. I picked it up, held it out. She looked up at me, then burst into tears, ran to her mother. They both fled. The doll stayed in my hand. I placed it gently on a bench and walked away. That was years ago, but I remember her face, not because of the fear, because for a moment I saw recognition. She didn't know my name, but she knew what I was, and she didn't want it touching anything that belonged to her. Even a toy. It teaches you something. Being feared for so long, you learn to speak softly, to move slow, to never reach too quickly. You learn the weight of your presence, and you carry it like armor, because without it, you're just a man with blood on his hands, and no one wants to see that, not even you. In my dreams, I walk through a town with no faces. Everyone wears hoods, not black like mine was, but blank, featureless. And they watch me, but they don't speak, don't move, just stand still until I wake up choking on air that isn't mine. Some say the soul leaves the body at death. I think it leaves before. With every swing, every knot tied, every pair of eyes you can't meet again. Pieces of you break off, drift, scatter, and by the end, you're more memory than man, more echo than voice. That's why I whisper now, because full voices belong to people who haven't carried what I have. And I no longer have the breath to speak loud. You learn, eventually, that there are no clean deaths, only quieter ones. Even the smoothest stroke leaves something behind, a twitch, a breath that didn't quite finish, a noise from the crowd, a second thought in your chest. That stays for days, years, forever. I remember the one I failed. He was young. The blade was sharp. The stance was steady. But I misjudged the angle, just slightly. The axe caught bone, didn't go through. He screamed. I swung again. That time, it was done. But the sound, the one between the two strikes, stayed. It still does. In dreams, in silence. Sometimes even between words. It taught me more than any training ever did. That precision is not pride. It's mercy. And when you get it wrong, there's no undoing it. Not for them. Not for you. After that day, I cleaned the axe differently. Slower. More focused. Like an apology. Not to him. To the blade. To myself. To whatever part of me still believed it mattered to care. Word spread. They said I botched it. That I hesitated. Some laughed. Others pitied. The magistrate pulled me aside. Told me, don't let it happen again. As if I didn't already carry it. As if he thought guilt was something new to me. I started drinking after that. Not much. Not enough to forget. Just enough to blur the edges. Make the voices quieter. Make the hours shorter. But they never stayed gone for long. You can't drown memory. It floats. That winter, the snow came early. Deep. Relentless. I remember standing by the block, watching flakes fall onto the condemned man's shoulders. He didn't shiver, didn't flinch. Just tilted his head back and let the snow touch his face like a blessing. It was the most peaceful death I'd ever seen. And it wasn't because of me. It was because he had made peace with it long before I arrived. Some do, most don't. But those who do, they make the job feel heavier because they show you what you took. Not just breath, but bravery, acceptance, stillness. And you carry that loss, even if no one else sees it. I stopped going into town after that winter. Not because I was ashamed, not exactly. Because I'd grown tired of pretending to be someone worth greeting. People crossed the street when they saw me, not out of fear anymore, out of habit. Even when I hadn't worked in months, even when the axe had dulled from neglect, they didn't see a man. They saw what I used to be, and that was enough to make me invisible. Sometimes I'd sit by the river, watch the ice drift, think about letting it carry me. But I didn't, because dying was never the hardest part. Living with what you've done, that's the real punishment. And I deserved mine. Every cold morning, every quiet night, every meal eaten alone. That was the sentence no one wrote down, the one they don't put on paper, the one the hangman gives himself. Now you know why I speak softly, why my eyes drift, why my hands tremble only when they're still. Because there is no rest. Not for men like me. Not in this life. And maybe not in the next. There's a particular sound that comes from the crowd when the condemned is someone they know. It's not outrage. Not shock. It's confusion. A rip in the fabric of their belief that justice only visits strangers. That punishment is for others. And when that illusion shatters, they look at me differently. Like I've broken something sacred. But I didn't choose the name. Only the blade. And the blade doesn't ask who you are. Only where to land. One day they brought me a woman. Not a witch. Not a thief. not a traitor. She had written something. A letter, they said. Words that questioned a noble. Words that spread. Truth, they called it. Sedition. She stood taller than most, shoulders back, chin high. But her eyes, they were tired. Like she'd already been executed 100 times before she even saw the scaffold. When I offered the cloth for her eyes, she refused. I want to see the sky, she said. So I let her, and in that moment, I hated the axe, hated the duty, hated that it would be me. Again, who made something beautiful disappear. But I did it. Clean. Precise. She deserved at least that. After, I sat beside the block longer than usual, until the blood froze to the wood, and I whispered, I'm sorry. To no one. To her. To myself. To the sky she didn't get to finish looking at. People ask, did any of them deserve it? Some did. Many didn't. And most, we'll never really know. 'Cause guilt and innocence are stories. And I only ever heard the ending. The part where someone like me enters and closes the curtain. There were times I dreamed of running north, east, where no one knew my face. Start over. Cut wood. Dig wells. Build instead of break. But dreams require a clean slate. And my hands were already full. With names, with regrets, with the sound of rope tightening. There was no room left for hope. A priest once told me I should repent. I said, I do, every day. He frowned. You must speak it, confess it. I shook my head. Words don't reach deep enough, I said. Not where this lives. He never came back. They don't tell you what happens to executioners when they grow old. We don't retire to honor. We don't write memoirs. We don't sit in town halls with medals. We vanish. Like tools left in the rain, rusting in quiet places, carried only in rumor, feared only in memory, until even that fades, and the only one who still sees you clearly is yourself. And that's the cruelest clarity of all. I built a bench once, with my own hands, no blood, no law, just wood and nails and silence. It creaks when I sit, but it holds. And sometimes that's enough. To sit in the fading light with the smell of pine and old dust and feel something, anything, other than the cold, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just pretend. It was late in the year when the final name came, delivered not with fanfare, not by a judge, but by a quiet knock at the door, a folded note, sealed in wax. No emblem. Just a name I knew too well. Jonas. He was the only friend I'd ever truly had. We grew up in the same alleyways, shared crusts of bread, bled in the same fights. He knew me before the axe, before the silence, before the mask. He was one of the few who never turned away when the town did. And now they wanted me to end him. His crime was political. He'd spoken out, helped smuggle a boy away from conscription, a boy whose name never made it to paper, but his did, and they wanted me to close that ledger. I sat with the note in my lap for a long time. The room was quiet. Even the wind had stopped. I read it again, not because I needed to, because I didn't know what else to do. How many names had I carried? How many faces forgotten? And now they handed me his. A test, maybe. A punishment. Or just another cruel twist of duty. I didn't answer the summons, not right away. Instead, I found him. He wasn't hiding, wasn't running, just sitting by the river, throwing stones into the cold water. He turned when he heard me, smiled softly. I wondered how long it would take. We didn't speak much, didn't need to. He knew, I knew. He didn't ask me to refuse, didn't beg. He just said, "Make it quick." And then, "I'm glad it's you." I wanted to scream, to run, to drop the blade in the river and never come back. But I didn't, because that's not how these stories end. Not for men like me. The square was empty that morning. No crowd, no guards, no witnesses, just us, like it had started, like it would end. He knelt. No rope, no priest, just stillness. I raised the blade, and for the first time in years, my hand shook, but I did it, not because I wanted to, because he asked me to, because it had to be clean, because he trusted me to carry it the way I had carried everything else. Afterward, I didn't clean the blade. I didn't return it. I didn't coil the rope. I walked. Out of the square, out of the town, into the woods. The cold bit my skin. The wind cut my throat. But I kept walking, because there was nothing left to stay for. No duty, no name. No more lines to write, only echoes and silence. If you hear this now, if these words reach you somehow, remember this. The worst part of being born an executioner in the Middle Ages wasn't the death, wasn't the blade, wasn't the loneliness. It was surviving it. Living long enough to understand what it took from you, and knowing you'll carry it until your last breath. And after that, even the earth may not want your bones, but I'll leave this story behind, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, just so someone will remember that I was here, that I swung the axe, and that I never forgot a single name, not even my own.